for transactions purposes can be very small, period. Of course, if it was a regular semester, I would emphasize that if you wanted to word that differently, then please do so when you send in your study questions. I'll just double check to make sure it says the same thing. But since it's a semester where you're basically going to be block copying stuff and pasting it in, we're not going to worry about that. But I am going to worry about you understanding it. So, what is it said here? First of all, you know the LM curve becomes flatter. Fair enough. Just remember, money supply is exogenous. So therefore, along any given LM curve, if M is going to be equal to L, then L can't change. And L is, of course, composed of LT and LS. So any change in LT must be exactly offset by a change in LS. All right, so when LS is more interest sensitive, when these people here are more interest sensitive, it means that it requires a smaller change in R to compensate them. All right? And so they take note of even small changes in the interest rate. There, and then I give an example. Therefore, for example, in the face of a given rise in LT, which is exactly the little diagram we did a moment ago, a flatter LM curve means that the rise in interest necessary to release cash from them to them, it can be very small. And that's it. Where's my hand? 2 more questions. And pardon me, let's skip to the last one because it's a little bit easier. And it'll get you sort of on seeing where we're going with this. Okay, this is what I had to do as an undergrad. This is what it all led up to, was these last 2 questions. Oh my gosh. Under these circumstances, should we use fiscal or monetary policy? Hey, let me just draw it for you first. Let me just talk about it first. I'm an idiot. I'm also tired. All right. Let's say we are considering using monetary policy, which means shifting the LM curve. And let me do it this way. There are 2 possible IS curves, all right? And here's our LM curve right here. And we're considering shifting it to the right, okay? We're considering a monetary policy, or actually it'd be shifting it down, because to the right is, well, anyway, it works out the same way. We're considering a monetary policy stimulus. When would it be more effective? When the IS curve is steep or when the IS curve is flat? When investors are interest insensitive or when investors are interest sensitive? Well, what's the point of an expansion in monetary policy but to lower interest? So you want people to be interest sensitive if your policy tool is going to be changing the interest rate. So the flat one should work better. So let's find out. For the same rightward shift in LM, and I'm sorry, I probably should have. We don't really care about the interest rate here. We're trying to expand the economy, so I'm not going to bother labeling what's on the vertical axis. Notice that the steep IS curve only got us from y sub 0 to y sub 1, but the flat LS curve, the interest-sensitive LS curve, got us from y sub 0 to y sub 2, all right? So we ended up finding that monetary policy is much more effective when the IS curve is flat, because it's ineffective, again, we're talking about here, which one's going to increase GDP more. And why is that true? Well, what's the goal of the monetary policy? What's to lower interest rates? So it's not going to do much good if nobody cares what interest rates are. You want people to be very sensitive to interest rates and to care what they are, and then when you undertake your monetary policy, you get a big bang for your buck. After the financial crisis, after the coronavirus crisis, the Fed cut interest rates and it did practically nothing. because people were like, yeah, it's not the interest rate I'm scared of. It's not the interest rate that's stopping me from investing right now. It's the fact that there is a financial crisis or a coronavirus running around. All right, so that's the first thing. When is monetary policy more effective? When the IS curve is flatter. All right, well, let's think about when is fiscal policy more effective? And then I'll be summarizing these two situations in study questions 117 and 118. When is fiscal policy more effective? And so what I want to do this time is I want to have a flat and a steep LM curve. Here's my steep one. There's my flat one. And we're going to have a fiscal policy stimulus. We're going to start here with a little tiny IS curve. So we start at y sub 0. So then we cut taxes or we increase government spending or whatever. So we have a parallel IS curve further out to the right. And I'm going to put 2 there because I'm going to put the 1 in the middle. Notice how much more effective fiscal policy was with a flat LM curve, all right? That with a flat LM curve, we went from y sub 0 to y sub 2. With a steep LM curve, we only went from y sub 0 to y sub 1. Now, of course, we're going to understand why did that happen, okay? Why did that happen? And this is the more complicated of the two scenarios, but it's not that bad, all right? The fiscal policy stimulus is going to drive interest rates up, right? I mean, one way or the other, the fiscal policy, if this is the way the world works, and it's not, but if this is the way the world worked, then the fiscal policy stimulus is going to drive interest rates up. We would prefer that it didn't drive them up that much, all right? We would prefer that it only drove them up to here rather than up to here because it's going to cause investment to fall. Yes, government spending went up and that helped, but investment's going to fall some. In both cases, investment's going to fall some because investment is a function of the interest rate, and the interest rate is going to go up in both scenarios. Now, why does it go up more on the steep curve? It goes up more on the steep curve because let's see what color here. I'll use this one. Those people are less interest sensitive on the steep LM curve. This is what's going on. Because this is moving out to the right, that means that LT is rising, right? That GDP is rising, therefore the transactions demand for cash is rising, therefore banks must find a way to get the LS people to give up their cash. And how do you do that? You raise the interest rate. You've got to get the cash to the LT people by attracting it from the LS people. And so when GDP rose, it drove up the transaction demand for cash. And so as a consequence, the speculative demand for cash has to fall because these two are equal to M sub 0. There has been no change in the money supply here. And we're assuming on both of these LM and LM prime, it's the same money supply, but it's a different relationship as far as LS goes. Anyway, the reason why the interest rate doesn't go up as much on this one is because remember, when the LS people are extremely interest sensitive, they're like, oh, you raised the interest rate by 0.1%? Absolutely. I'm going all in on bonds. So it was very easy for banks to get the cash to the LT people on the flat curve because the speculative demanders were so excited about the tiny increase in the interest rate that they supplied funds by buying CDs, by putting money in savings account, by buying bonds. And I think I will mark the increase in the interest rate on this one since it's a little bit more relevant. So the interest rate didn't have to go up that much to finance the new higher level of GDP, and so therefore investment didn't fall that much. Investment didn't fall that much when we had the flatter LM curve, because it was so easy to get these people to give up their cash. We offered them, we dangled 1/10 of a percentage point increase in the interest rate, and they're all excited about it. On the steep one, they were like, what, are you freaking kidding me? I'm not giving up my cash. You could offer me more interest than that. And so it's a very interest insensitive speculative demand on the steep LM curve. And so they are reluctant to give up the cash. You have to offer more and more interest, and that lowers the investment. Investment fell a lot more from Y0 to Y1. The increase in government spending was exactly the same, but the increase in the interest rate was much bigger here, so the decline in investment was much bigger here than it was here. Kind of neat, huh? It all makes sense. It all makes sense. If only the initial premises were reliable, if only the model were cogent. It is certainly valid. All right. So here is, so that's what those are the last two study questions right there. But now I'm going to give you the sort of summary answers for each of them. And I think I've changed my mind. I think let's do the harder one first. Let's go ahead and do that one. And I'm not going to write it out there because I'm not going to have room, but I am going to sketch out the diagram. So let's do this. Let's do this. So here's the harder one of the two. Let me wake up the computer here. So close to beer now. And I'm really tired. Of course, I give you tests on the end of this week. Today is Tuesday. And I'm going to get them suckers graded and back to you as soon as I can, like I always do. But then having all this done hopefully will help you, and it will also help me, because I have a paper I'm really dying to finish on business cycles, actually. It is a survey of different business cycle theories, including the one we went over in class. Okay. Here is the one we just did on the graph over here, all right? So, and that's kind of the reason I ended up deciding to change my mind and do the more complicated one first, because we just did it. And so I want to have this fresh in your mind as we go to the more complicated of the two study questions, which is 117. And I will have, by the time you view this, I will have emailed you 117. But let's nevertheless go over what it has here. Let me have a look at my monitor to make sure it's nice and clear. Yes. All right. When is a fiscal stimulus more effective? When do you get a bigger bang for your buck out of a rightward shift in IS? And of course, when the LM curve is really flat. Okay. Describe that. Oop, there we go. All right. A fiscal stimulus is represented by a rightward shift in IS. This is more effective. What do you mean by effective, John? It results in a higher increase in Y when the LM curve is flatter. All right, so that's the first thing you want to say. You want to say, look, well, what do you mean by fiscal stimulus? Well, that's the rightward shift in the IS curve, and it's going to work better relative to the horizontal axis when the LM curve is flatter. Well, why does it work that way? Why is that true? This is simply because under those circumstances, those holding cash for speculative purposes require a smaller increase in R to convince them to surrender their cash to those with the now higher transactions demand for money. Going back over here again. On the flat LM curve, it only required a slight increase in the interest rate to convince these people to give up their cash for these people. That's exactly what the answer just said. Yeah, all right. Thus, there is a smaller fall in investment due to the movement up the IS curve to the new equilibrium. Thus, there is a smaller fall in investment on this IS curve. Here's the, it says the new point of equilibrium. There's the new point of equilibrium. There's the new point of equilibrium, depending on which curve we're on. There is a smaller decline in investment on the way up the IS curve to the new point of equilibrium on the flat curve than there is on the steep curve. Now, I then have a diagram that explains the sequence of events. I'm also really hungry suddenly, and Melanie, like a jerk, made a cake. And oh my God, it's so good. So I'm thinking, I need to have a piece of cake right now. Maybe that's even more important than beer. All right, so let's see here. We have done some things kind of like this before. What we have here is, let's see, do I want to sketch this out? I think I do. So I'm not having you draw the graph, but I do want you to show me the sequence of events that is describing. So I'm going to sketch this out over here. I've got it there, of course, but let's write it out over here once I find my notes again. Yeah, they're there. Okay. Back over here. Okay. So and this is part of the answer, all right? The others, when I've been showing you graphs, I say, yeah, it's not part of the answer, not part of the answer, not part of the answer. This is part of the answer. What sets the whole thing off? A rightward shift in the IS curve. And what does that create? It creates an increase in GDP. Now, the increase in GDP is going to cause, I hope I'm not going to run out of room here. No, I should be all right. The increase in GDP is going to cause an increase in that transactions demand for cash. And the increase in the transactions demand for cash is going to cause a rise in the interest rate, which then subsequently causes that compensating fall in the speculative demand for cash. All right, so I'm going to add a couple things to this, but that's the main line of causation right there. The rightward shift in the IS curve causes GDP to rise, which causes the transactions demand for money to go up. Banks are short of cash. So what do? They raise interest rates to attract that cash from those who are holding cash for speculative purposes, because remember, there's no extra cash. The Fed hasn't increased the money supply. Now, however, there's a couple of notes you have to make here. One is, and again, this semester you won't be drawing it out anyway, but you need to note that those two are equal. All right, I want you to know, I want to see that when you studied this, you were clear on the idea that LT didn't go up by $5 and LS go down by $3. No, they are exactly the same because the money supply is fixed. There's another thing you need to bear in mind, and that is that when that interest rate went up, and I'm going to draw this in a different color here just to sort of show this secondary event. That lowered investment, all right? That's what we were talking about. We said this fiscal policy here is going to cause interest rates to go up, which is going to cause investment to go down, all right? So we had the bump in government spending or cut in taxes that raised GDP, but there's also going to be a negative impact. It's going to drive up interest rates, which is going to cause investment to fall. And then the falling investment is going to cause falling GDP. And another note you have to make here is that the rise in GDP, by the way, is nevertheless bigger than the fall, all right? So we don't have a net decline in GDP. GDP still goes up because of this right here. GDP still goes up, it just doesn't go up as much, all right? So this is just saying the absolute value of the increase is bigger than the absolute size of the decrease. So we still have a net increase in GDP, it's just not as big. Last thing to indicate on this, and this is where you're really getting at the interest sensitivity stuff. Oops, I meant that to be an M. smaller here means smaller here. Do I want to check? It doesn't matter. Yeah, okay, over here. This is what we're worried about with the fiscal policy stimulus. It's going to raise interest rates. But the less interest rates go up, the less investment's going to fall. So that last notation there, which again is part of the answer, and you probably already have it in your, I would have emailed this to you already by the time you see this video, but you have to indicate that too, all right? You have to indicate, so notice there's sort of 3 extra notes on here. Those are equal. The absolute size of the increase in GDP is bigger than the fall. And I want to see that you are consciously thinking about, in this sequence of events, this is the critical point right here. The less interest rates go up, the smaller the fall in investment is going to be. Hooray. Goodness gracious, there's only one study question left. And this is the one that is simpler than the one we just did. The one we just did, here, let me show you. Okay. The one we just did, and let me actually move over to the study question list. Oh, heck, I accidentally clicked on Word. The one we just did was 117. In the Neoclassical Keynesian model, under what conditions is fiscal policy effective? Explain. I guess I never read the question to you, did I? When is fiscal policy effective? Well, it's effective when the, let me get my study questions here. It's effective when the LM curve is flatter. And why? Because interest rates won't go up as much. Why is it more effective then? Why is fiscal policy more effective? When is it more effective? When the LM curve is flatter, because under those circumstances, that doesn't go up as much. So the negative sort of feedback here at the end doesn't end up having as big an effect on sort of swamping the positive impact of the government spending. Well, guess what the next one is? And we've already done it. And it's the simpler of the 2 scenarios, so that's good. We're done with the last one's going to be an easy one. In the Neoclassical Keynesian model, under what conditions is monetary policy effective? Well, as I told you already, when I drew the graph out, I said, hey, what's the goal of monetary policy? Well, the goal is to lower interest rates. So what would you want to have in terms of interest rate sensitivity on the IS curve? You'd want people to be very interest sensitive. You'd want people to be, if you're lowering interest rates to try to stimulate macroeconomic activity, you want people to be sensitive to interest rates. If they're not sensitive, it's not going to have much impact. So, as I say, we've already drawn it out, and I'm just going to write the answer out now. 118, 118. A monetary policy stimulus parentheses, that is, increase in money supply, is represented by a downward shift in LM. This is more effective. This is more effective, comma, that is, it raises Y more, comma, when the IS curve is flatter. When the IS curve is flatter. All right, so that's just the geometry, right? Now, why? And here's the last sentence for the entire frickin' semester. This is so because under those circumstances, saying, sorry, circumstances, my C and U got screwed up. Firms' behavior is affected by even small. Firms' behavior is affected by even small changes in R, all right? And when, ouch, there's a fall in R due to the, almost done, monetary policy stimulus, comma, it yields a bigger increase in investment. The stimulus is going to be a downward shift in LM. It's going to cause a bigger increase in Y when the IS curve is flatter, as I showed earlier. Why? Well, because on a flatter IS curve, firms are more acutely affected by changes in interest rates. They are much more sensitive to it. They really pay a lot of attention to it. And so, since the monetary policy is going to lower the interest rate, then you're going to get a bigger increase in investment. And therefore, that's when you get the, am I not high enough on there? Yeah. And that's what you were after. Whew. Sorry I couldn't see you for the rest of the semester. I really enjoyed coming to class, as I hope you clearly realized. But there's one more thing I might put together for class, but it's not, I guess I might as well kneel down. But it doesn't have to do with study questions. It has to do with the extra credit points and the Excel model. I know I've already put together one video on how to do the Excel model, but this is something that there are going to be two assignments, two optional assignments. I'm still thinking about that, but otherwise, I believe the refrigerator is calling me. Au revoir.